what's fascinating from a creative aspect of that issue is he didn't write it all at once. And so dealing with artwork where I knew I needed to connect things from each spread to each spread, even though it's a menagerie of things and almost a tapestry with different layers and levels that need to coincide with each other. His writing process was no different on that than it was on the entire series, where he would write some pages, send them over, and I would get started. Uh, and there was a point on the issue where I don't know, I'll just randomly saying I'm drawing pages 6 and 7. I want to know what's happening on 8 and 9. I don't have 8 and 9 from him, so
He
I would
doesn't know.
call him. Yeah, I would call him. What's happening on the next page? And he'd be, honestly, I don't know, Jim, because I haven't written it yet.
Hi, welcome back to the Comics Cube, everyone. Today we are with J.H. Williams III, and if all goes well, this is going to be the first show of 2021. How are you doing, Mr. Williams?
Good. Thanks for having
First question is, what does the H stand for? Because I know the J stands for Jim.
me. It stands for Herald.
Okay.
Yeah.
And so I discovered your work through the first issue of Promethea. As you can see, I'm a big fan.
Yeah, I appreciate that back there. It's cool to see those.
Were you aware in this book you say that you've never had the guts to ask Alan why he chose you, but that you
That's
might
true.
ask him someday? Did you ever ask him?
No. Nope.
Were you aware of the other names that were attached on the book at the time?
Yes, I was told. I'm trying to think of the time frame. I was told. Was told pretty early on that I wasn't the first choice. And I don't know if that. I don't know if that was necessarily first choice from Alan himself, but I think editorial
Mm-hmm.
was looking at other people, certainly bigger names than myself, uh, because which makes sense. They're going to try to pair Alan up with the biggest people they can.
Yeah, it was it was Brandon Peterson because he was working with him on Awesome Comics. And
Right.
then when he turned that down, it was Alan Davis, then Bruce Timm, and
Yeah.
after you, it would have been P. Craig Russell.
Wow.
How does it feel? Like, I mean, obviously you're a big name now, but how did it feel like in 1999 being in that company of artists?
Surreal. You know, I don't even. I mean, I know how my name came up, but being associated with those guys, and it makes sense that I would be down the totem pole for choices based on those guys' reputations. It shocks me that they didn't approach P. Craig Russell before myself. Honestly, uh, you know, I'm a huge Craig Russell fan. I'm a fan of all those guys, but I could see Russell really bringing some particular magic to the concept. But I'm glad it was me.
I am too. Like, you clearly brought something to it that the others wouldn't have brought. I mean, when I saw that Bruce Timm was attached to it, I was like, that would have been a very different book.
Yeah, for sure. I think he would have. I'm very curious what that would have looked like, just out of my own fanship perspective. I'm very curious what any of these guys' interpretations would have looked like, not knowing anything that I was doing with
Mm-hmm.
it. You know what I mean? I don't know. Like, would Tim have brought a certain um, storybook quality that, in terms of a more cartooning storybook quality, and then maybe I could see even influences from Kirby on him, maybe as that story concept was developed, because it was such a fantastical story. And it'd be interesting to There's no way to, maybe in another universe, another reality, those exist out there.
In those alternate realities, do you think
Yeah.
that book would have gotten as personal as it did? I mean, it was as personal for you as it for you and Wendy, right? As it was for
Yeah.
Alan.
Yeah.
And do you think it would have gotten to that level, or is
I
that
don't
something
know.
that you think you specifically brought to the collaboration?
I don't know. At the time that those guys were being considered, it's hard to know what Alan was picturing for the bigger concept, you know, going into the metaphysics of it. I think all that stuff probably would have been broached. I don't know, without knowing those other individuals very well, how they would have related to the material versus myself. I think because I personally, because I had a personal relatability to the material, that maybe hopefully opened up the doors more for Alan to go further and further with it. Um, I'm not sure if what we would have gotten out of those other guys would have lasted as long. Who knows? Um, yeah. I mean, it had the largest number of issues, I think, besides Tom Strong, right?
Yeah, and Tom Strong, Alan didn't write the last one fifth, I think.
Okay. Yeah.
Yes, so he actually wrote more issues of Promethea
Right.
than Tom Strong. Do you, if I go back a little further and I look at your work on Chase and I look at your work on The Shade and Starman, I can already see some of the design elements.
Mm,
It was actually, I noticed it was a little similar to, because you were working on Starman, so I noticed it was a little similar to what Tony Harris was doing in terms of the panel designs and everything.
um,
But then on Promethea, you just kind of let loose with all the double page spreads that would eventually become your trademark. Was that a personal request for Alan, or do you,
no, not really. Let me think. I mean, the double page spreads, it's hard to remember exactly how those became so prevalent. I think maybe as Alan and I had conversations about what could be done on the comic book page, the idea for toying with the fact that pages sit side by side the way they do for a visual medium became something that we wanted through just natural process, uh, see what could be done with it. How do you defy that space? I guess you could say, rather than define it, it was more defy it. Um, but as far as the design aspects are concerned, I think probably 50% of the ideas that you see come from Alan, and 50% of the visual ideas come from me. Um, Throughout the series, so it became a real marriage of two different minds involved with the same goal of how we could push the space.
that's interesting because there's that one Will Eisner quote that says the best comics can only come from one mind, which I've always kind of taken issue with. I don't think it's true, but
First time I've heard that quote. That's fascinating.
I think it's from Comics and Sequential Art.
Okay.
But I don't think it's true. But if we look at it from the approach that you just mentioned, where both your minds are in sync,
Yes.
then it makes more sense.
Yeah, I think I guess it depends on the project and the creators involved, or the project or creator. You know, um, with something like Promethea, I kind of felt like it really felt like it was the both of us trying to do something unique. And as we would talk about the project, at going along the series, it became like, oh, well, you have this idea. Well, that makes me think of this idea. Or the other person would suggest an idea in terms of like overall visual aesthetic to maybe a particular chapter or something like that. Quite often we would converse before Alan would write that next chapter.
Yeah.
And, he would say, oh, well, I picture this next chapter having these themes in it. And maybe something he said in our conversation inspired me to think about, oh, well, that's interesting. What do you think about, you know, woodblock prints? you know, and we would talk about different visual aesthetics, and that would find its way into the scripts, and he would write towards those ideas. So it very much was like a push and pull in seeing where the other person was willing to go on both sides, I think.
It leads into my next question. I was talking to Bill Sienkiewicz and Xander Cannon, and also Gene Ha, but I think Xander was the one doing the layouts for Top 10. And they basically said that while Alan does say to his artists that you can take liberties,
Yes.
they didn't really want to.
Uh-huh.
Is is the same as your experience, or
No.
no?
I felt the freedom. Okay, so he would most very often some of the ideas would find their way into the scripts anyway, as we had already previously talked about a visual theme or visual idea. Like, oh, maybe this issue should have the focus should be impressionist painting. I would throw that out there, and then he would go, oh, well, that makes me think of this, and how do we work that in, and things like that, and it would find its way in there, which made me feel like even though he would go through these long, very descriptive moments in the scripting, he would always end it with, if you see it differently, go for it. And I was at the beginning, I wasn't sure how literal he was about that until I actually asked him. I was just like, I called him up, early on thinking of an idea. I'm like, hey, I've got this idea. And he's like, well, if that's how you see it, do it, you know? So he was extremely open, and that made me feel very comfortable. And maybe that lended to why the series feels so collaborative and so willing to take risks, because we both kind of were like, hey, let's try it. Why not?
I was interviewing Todd Klein as well, and I asked him about ABC, and I asked him, like, of all the artists in ABC, who do you think changed the most from 1999 to 2006? And he said, without question, it was you, J.H. Williams III.
Oh,
Like,
that's cool.
do you think, like, can you describe like your personal or artistic growth throughout that particular period?
Sure.
Because
I
there's a
kind of always,
difference.
what's
there's a
that?
there's a difference. There's a very visible difference.
I kind of feel like Promethea Promethea allowed an evolution to occur that I hoped I would have always gotten there, regardless of Promethea as being the project that it happened on. Primarily because throughout my career, I've always tried to push myself to something else than what I did the day before.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but what with Promethea allowed, it was the perfect vehicle to say, oh, let's see what I can actually do. I have no rules. The rules are set by myself. Um, so it's not like working on a Batman book or a Superman book or a Marvel book where there's all these established things already taking place and you can only get away with so much manipulation. Where with Promethea, it was all world building content and all original content. And then it was about acceptance and exploring and pushing the idea of imagination itself. So it was the perfect vehicle to allow me to see where we could go. Um, so in terms of personal growth, I feel like I learned a lot on that.
Mm-hmm.
In some ways, I think I learned more, not just as a necessarily as an artist. Of course, I feel like every project I do, I learn something new with my art, and try to force myself to learn something new with my art as I go along, regardless of what the project is. But the thing I think I learned the most about with Promethea was what kind of stories I want to tell and the way I want to tell them. Um, you know, not just as an artist, but as a as a writer. You
Yeah.
know, how could you not? You work with Alan Moore for 6 years. How could you not learn something by osmosis?
Of course.
Yeah.
Did who's your favorite Promethea to draw?
Oh, I don't know. Oh, that's tough.
Okay, which of Sophie's two costumes is the one you prefer to draw?
I prefer the red.
Really?
Yeah, because I
That's
think it's
interesting.
more. Yeah, I think it speaks more to what she ended up being about. There's
Mm-hmm.
something um, more regal about it, I guess you could say. The fact that it moved from less of a warrior woman kind of look to something more regal and goddess like.
Yeah.
Um, and in some instances, like, a fiery angel um, felt more appropriate.
Promethea #1 for me was the most mind blowing first issue I've ever read of
Oh, cool.
anything. And then 11 issues later, Promethea #12. Can you talk to me how that came about with the each page leading into the next and the
It
last
was,
page leading into the first?
yeah. I think it started off as an idea from Alan about having it be an issue that was supposed to fold out like an accordion,
Mhm.
um, and that was our original intent for before he started writing. Um, what's fascinating from a creative aspect of that issue is he didn't write it all at once, and so dealing with artwork where I knew I needed to connect things from each spread to each spread, even though it's a menagerie of things and almost a tapestry with different layers and levels that need to coincide with each other. His writing process was no different on that than it was on the entire series, where he would write some pages, send them over, and I would get started. Uh, and there was a point on the issue where I don't know. I'll just randomly saying I'm drawing pages 6 and 7. I want to know what's happening on 8 and 9. I don't have 8 and 9 from him, so
He
I would
doesn't know.
call him. Yeah, I would call him. What's happening on the next page? And he'd be, honestly, I don't know, Jim, because I haven't written it yet, which was eye opening to hear when he's wanting this tapestry idea in this one long connective thread. And so I had to figure out, like, okay, no matter what I do here, I have to make sure I find a way to connect it to the next spread, even though I have no idea what's going to happen, which is, interesting challenge and sort of kind of, there's certain aspects where that makes you nervous, but it also kind of is like, well, we'll figure it out. That's sort of the magic there. We'll figure it out. It'll happen. It'll be okay. You know, um, that issue. If we ever get to do the Immateria edition that we've long talked about, that gets greenlit then not greenlit, greenlit not greenlit. If that actually ever happens, one of the things is that issue. They even made a mock-up of this issue as
Really?
accordion. It's like 16 feet. It's long, but it would have been so cool. So if we ever do the Immateria edition, I hope we get to go through with that and offer that in the way it was meant to be read. Same with issue 32. Issue 32 is meant to be read as a poster. It was never meant to be read as a stapled comic ever.
As two posters.
Yes.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
I was
It
gonna
was
ask
old.
about that next.
Yeah.
I was gonna ask about that next, because for the viewers watching this, issue 32 is a backwards, not a backwards issue, but each page has numbers,
Yes.
and you can disassemble the comic and in the order of the numbers,
Yes.
and it'll form these posters, and it'll still read completely coherently.
Yes.
Now,
Yes.
how I remember there was some disgruntlement on the internet saying that it was really late. And when it came out, I thought, how could it not have been really late?
Interestingly, I'm not sure as to the reasons why it was so late, other than a few things were going on. I know Alan definitely took a while to make sure to write it the way he wanted it to read, and he figured out the puzzle of it, of course, because that's Alan. That's what he does. Um, but for me, like the entire second half of Promethea, I was dealing with personal issues. My dad got ill.
I'm sorry to
Had
hear that.
Yeah, he had multiple strokes, had to be permanently hospitalized. So the entire second half of the series was just ended up being no more than 4 issues a year.
Mm-hmm.
Um, there was just no other way to do it. Everyone was cool. The publisher was fine letting it be that way. Alan was fine letting it be that way. Um, so when I actually did start working on issue 32, it was the fastest issue I did of the entire series, even though it was late. Go figure. um, and yeah, that's another issue. I wish we could have released it the way we originally wanted to where there was no stapled comic. We made it work to where, of course, it still reads as a staple comic and it reads as a
Yeah.
poster. It was never meant to be a stapled comic. It was meant to be a folded thing, and you unfold it and read it that way. Um,
I
uh,
remember for both comics, I was looking at them thinking, how many of these do I need to buy in order to put
right,
them together?
right. Yeah, I wish they had made the 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 two poster set that they did that came with like a little book of the covers that Alan and I
Yeah.
signed. I wish they had made that more available than they did. I think there's only like 1,000 or 1,500 of those in existence, or maybe even less. I can't remember. Yeah, but
Uh,
what can you do? Publishers are going to decide what they want to decide. I mean, that's partly what led to some of Alan's frustrations. Was the some of the restrictions that come about when you're dealing with a large publisher. So something like, even with Promethea 32, the one example, besides not being able to release it as a full-on poster only, some of the trails like the onks and the little stars and stuff, those were
yeah.
actually, we originally wanted those to be a colored ink, like a metallic silver and gold
Yeah.
uh, metallic. And even though we got the posters, they didn't want to foot the bill to pay for the extra ink, that sort of stuff. And for someone like Alan, who's just about ultimately mostly about just being as creative as possible, it drives him nuts to run into those kinds of limitations when he just wants to produce an artifact. Um, and I understand that, how difficult that can be.
Yeah, Alan has a reputation on the internet, which I believe is driven by him not being on the internet. Uh,
Yeah,
the and people have they read these headlines and then they ascribe a personality to him. And I
yeah.
ask you what he's been really like in your experience.
In my experience, he's one of the warmest individuals I've ever met. Um, is Yes, in interviews he can come across as being cantankerous and rightfully um, annoyed and frustrated with some of the things that have happened to him in the industry. But a lot of times when he's speaking with criticism in those interviews, what's fascinating to me when having conversations with him in the past, and he would discuss similar criticisms, the result, even though he was serious about them, he would speak with a sense of not joviality, but kind of like
A little
there
over
was
the top.
a little humor there always
Yeah.
about things. I think people think he's much more grumpy than he is, um, in terms of how he speaks, his tone of voice, I guess you could say. He, I never ever really heard him speak with any anger. even when he was frustrated about different situations. He would have a very serious perspective, of course,
Hmm.
but I never heard him speak with a sense of bitterness or anger.
It's interesting. Yeah.
Yeah. At
So
least his tone of voice. I mean, he might have appropriately upset wordage in what he's saying, but he never kind of, it never felt like he was overly um, going to batter you with an emotion over it. That makes sense.
yeah, I asked that question specifically because despite the dearth of topics that happen on this channel, whenever anyone mentions Alan Moore as a person, all of a sudden the clicks start coming in. And I'm like, you guys, you are we way too obsessed with people as, you know, outside of their work? I don't know. But how do you feel about DC using Promethea in the main DC line?
Well, I understand their reasons for doing it. Um, what was shocking to me when that first happened in a couple of years ago now, I guess
Yeah.
already, uh, is I didn't find out until the rest of the world found out.
Really?
Uh, yeah, I wasn't informed, and that's what really made me so angry. Um, and I don't know if it's because I was just considered the artist on the project, why it wasn't they felt it was necessary to talk to me ahead of time about it. I knew they weren't going to talk to Alan about it. Um, Matter of fact, when that whole thing was taking place, I called him to talk to him about it, and he wasn't aware until I told him. But he didn't really want to discuss it.
Yeah, I
Uh,
think we know
he
how
left it up
DC's
to me how to.
conversation would have gone with Alan if they had tried to talk to him about it.
Yeah, exactly. He left it up to me on how to handle it. You know, the end result was, that they have to now. I don't know if I'll ever get from them the forethought to contact me ahead of time to at least inform me it's happening. What I wanted was consultation. Um, and, that was something they didn't want to do, probably because they didn't want to have to deal with somebody to, having any authority over uh, what to do with the concept, I guess. But at least now, they said any future stuff that they will, they have to legally credit Alan and myself if
Yeah.
she's used in anything uh, for comics. Um, but yeah, I was a little. It was upsetting because Promethea was such a personal work.
Yeah.
It wasn't just hey, I created this Batman story that everybody loves so much, and they want to regurgitate parts of that. It wasn't the case. This was a very personal, very specific project, and um, so without having anyone letting me know. And what was crazy to me is when I had conversations with them about the situation, my contact over there was, I basically they didn't know it was happening. That's what they told me, and I didn't understand how they couldn't know. They were upper management people, how they couldn't know when it was coming out in 2 weeks. You know, I mean, it's like that sort of thing was like what. uh, so it was frustrating, but at the same time, as a corporation, I understand that they want these things to thrive, and they want to use these characters. I can understand that perspective, but can't there be a meeting in the middle somewhere? Is what my point to it all was.
I
Yeah,
saw some of the pages from it. I didn't buy the issue, like, and
I didn't either.
I wouldn't, but I'm like, from the start I was like, well, first of all, she doesn't exist anymore in that incarnation, so I don't know why they're using that. Second of
Uh,
all, why does she have irises?
yeah, right.
Like, I mean, can't we at least stay on model?
I have no answers to
Why is her
that.
hair straight?
I have no answers to that. You know, um, I have no idea how that stuff even occurs. No slight against the artists or whatever on that. And without being involved in the whole creative process behind it, that's kind of what I was after. It was like some continuity consultation stuff.
Yeah.
Um, it's disappointing I couldn't get that. Whether it's going to become an issue in the future, or who knows. Um, but it would be nice to have someone who oversaw it. It's like, fine, I don't have the authority to say you can use her or not use her. Fine, whatever. That's corporate decision. They own the majority of the character. That's their decision. But it would be nice to be involved in the process, and that as the
Yeah.
original creators having the respect enough to come to me or Alan for continuity guidance about, well, if we're going to use her, let's make sure it's lining up, you know, without having read the story that they published. I have no idea how much it lined up. I didn't want to read it. I was so upset about the whole situation. So,
I'm told she's barely in it. So,
uh,
real,
interestingly, I
yeah,
do know. Interestingly, didn't she face off against the
the Queen of Fables.
right? I thought that
Yeah.
was fascinating because I drew that character in Justice League for a
Oh
couple issues.
yeah.
Yeah,
Oh yeah.
and
I forgot about that actually.
that's pretty funny.
Um, Now after Alan Moore, we're skipping a little bit to one of your next big projects. You worked with Grant Morrison.
Mhm.
How many people get to say, I worked with Alan Moore, then I
Uh-huh.
worked with Grant Morrison,
Uh-huh.
and then later on I worked with Neil Gaiman? But
Right.
so what was it like working with Grant Morrison on Seven Soldiers? Is it a different collaborative experience?